we have made two complete sets of forecasts this time because the uncertainty we're facing is so high. We don't know much about the virus. We know there's no vaccine, no treatment, and as long as there's none of those and the virus is prevalent, we will have to live with it. And you know it's rising in some places in the world, it's decreasing in some, but it's still there. And that means that we cannot have an economy that's fully operating. Travel is being very restricted. Some borders are closed. Services which involve physical relationship cannot work properly. So what we are saying is, we were going to see an upturn which will look like a V-shaped recovery as deconfinement proceeds and because some sectors are reopening and can work. But because tourism, entertainment, leisure, and so on cannot work as before, this V will stop very quickly, and then the climb back to where we were before is going to be much more difficult. And by the end of 2021, we will not have renewed with the output that we had in 2019.
And the employment picture is obviously very central to how these economies around the world evolve. And one of the big questions is when we see unemployment levels return to pre-coronavirus levels, how are you thinking about the labor market around the world and the various policies that have been put in place to support workers as we get through the crisis? But what's the outlook longer term?
So this is one of our main concerns, because as you rightly mentioned, what we are seeing is a surge in obviously people not being in employment any longer, but there's been a lot of job retention scheme and income protection for workers throughout the world. But what we are seeing is a couple of things. First, the sectors which are being the most affected and which will remain impaired during these transition phases when we live with the virus, they're also the sectors where you have the highest proportion of young people and the highest proportion of vulnerable workers with non-standard form of contract. So there's a big risk if we don't have very active labor market policies that these young people or the less qualified people remain unemployed for long. And our fear is that not enough is done for them, and that it widens inequality. Even so, a lot could be done, right? So other sectors will pick up, like e-commerce or care. So if we want to avoid widening inequality with a high share of low-paid people unemployed, we have to help them move into the sectors which are going to strive over the next years.
In terms of preparing workers for that shift that you just described, where do you think the onus of responsibility lies? Is this the role of governments, of companies themselves, of universities? How do you ensure the successful upskilling and reskilling of workers?
So that's a very good question, and I think you quote the three actors that have to play a key role in this. First, universities and education is going to change as well, because it's going to be very difficult to have teaching in very cramped places. So digital will step in there. It will make available for a lot of people courses that they couldn't necessarily access. But we will need a combination or coordination of governments and firms to help people get back into job, because the firms know what they need and what they will need, and the governments can help with the training. So it's really the public and private sector working together, and the education system putting in place something that will be that will reach far more many people than they used to.
Now, when you think about the possible impacts of the pandemic, one feature of the conversation that continues to come up is the possibility that we see an increased demand for protectionism over globalization. What's your take? Do you see the pandemic necessarily leading to increased protectionism? And if so, what does this mean for a global economic output?
So you're right. I think the trade tensions, as you know, and as we've mentioned several times, started before this crisis. But what this crisis has actually shown is that when you put barrier to trade, and I'm thinking about medical protective equipment, then what you're creating is shortages for everybody and higher prices for everybody. So that's not a good way to do things, because if you block one component in one country, then you're blocking the entire supply chain. I think what this is telling us is we need more diversified sources for supply chain. It's at the moment protective equipment, for example, is very concentrated in a handful of countries. We need diversification too. That's the basic risk insurance. Second thing, we need more stocks. Perhaps we need to move a little away from just in time to just in case. And thirdly, I think we also need in some country and from some security business, some production at home in big regions. But having said that, trade is part of the solution to growth. We know growth and trade are thriving hand in hand. And one of the main reasons for that is that the key countries of a supply chain, they go from advanced economy to emerging market economies. And if it's all of us grow and participate to this production, that the world can actually get out of there very quickly. We shouldn't forget that the trade openness of the 90s has actually lifted about a third of the world out of poverty.